Tragedy of Prize. Mr. John Prize was the CEO of Now Now, a social media site designed for live videos feeds and photos from all over the world. He was just added to the Fortune 500 list of wealthiest people in the world, at a total worth of $35 billion, which was largely due to government funding in the sector of mind control. Mr. Prize developed Now Now at the age of 31. 10 years later, at the age of 41, Prize found himself with a nagging question. What do I spend my money on? Prize spoke to himself while he looked into his bathroom mirror with an analyzing eye. He was unfulfilled with the norms of spending. A huge fortified mansion, 20 cars, acquaintances, and all the other byproducts of a wealthy man's desires. Prize walked into his unused kitchen. Vector? Prize called out, addressing his in-home AI system. Yes, Mr. Prize? What do I eat this morning? Prize asked. This morning is 2 open-range eggs, 2 leaves of spinach, and a 1/4 ounce of goat cheese imported from Holland. Serve me, Prize said as he sat down alone at his kitchen table. I will have it for you momentarily, Vector replied. Prize looked around his kitchen and admired his futuristic appliances and motif, the smooth, shiny surfaces with hidden infrared buttons and sensors. Everything was top of the line, advanced, and very expensive. I have everything I could ever want, he spoke out loud to himself. A segment of the table dropped down and came back up almost immediately, displayed with a tray of eggs, spinach, and goat cheese. Prize noticed a cup of coffee set to the side on the tray next to his silverware. Can I get anything else for you, Mr. Prize? No, this is it. Prize thought for a moment. Wait, hold on. What can I get for you? Vector asked. I didn't ask for coffee. I know that, Mr. Prize. My algorithm and programming allows me to learn, and I know that you will want coffee in just a few minutes. Prize paused and replied, All right, thanks. Can I get you anything else? Vector asked. No, everything is fine. Prize finished his breakfast and grabbed a final sip from his coffee cup. The moment he stood up, the tray of food lowered into the tabletop. A segment of table returned empty and clean. Prize left the kitchen and continued on with his routine. After he took a shower and got dressed, he stopped in front of his bedroom window. The window was huge and was set in a thick, framed square. The clarity of the glass was so pristine, it looked like you could walk right out into the open air. Soft green rolling hills were nestled to left of the city skyline. Prize could see the building he owned clearly from his house, even though it was miles away. The concrete-colored building was thinner than the others around it, and it had unique, geometric windows that were akin to black vertical stripes from top to bottom. Prize admired what he had accomplished, but he couldn't shake the emptiness inside. While en route to Now Now headquarters, Mr. Prize's driverless car shook erratically. What's going on? Mr. Prize shoved his fingers through his medium-length hair, attempting to get it back into place. The car shook again. Vector, what's happening? A beep lightly sounded off. Yes, Mr. Prize. It seems we are being accosted by exterior offenders. I'm going to engage electricity shield. A couple more jarring movements ensued, accompanied by the resonance of electrical shocks. Show me on the screen, Prize said firmly. A small flat screen like S-sheet glowed with high-definition camera feeds. Protesters? Why didn't you drive around them? There are exterior offenders on every route to Now Now. The GPS coordinates showed this route was the route of least resistance. Mr. Prize watched the screen and saw throngs of wild-eyed protesters throw miscellaneous objects at the car. They were shouting with their fists in the air as they held signs that were easily readable through the camera feeds. They read "The rich must pay," "Save the earth, not capitalism," and "We are gods," and "Mr. Darkly can save us." Don't worry, Mr. Prize, this car cannot be penetrated. You are safe, the AI driver said through the interior sound system. Mr. Price watched the screen as they passed the enraged crowd. The number of people began to thin out to zero, and he felt a peaceful ease well up in his stomach. That's better. I've actually never been through a mob like that. Mr. Price was perfectly aware that he was talking to himself, due to the fact that he was almost always alone. The car drove up to the Now building and parked curbside. Your account has been charged. Have a nice day, the AI computer said. Mr. Price stepped out of the car. He felt the cold of the concrete sidewalk through the soles of his sneakers. He saw the entrance door to Now, and as the car drove away, he cased the empty sidewalks that surrounded his business empire. The lobby to Now was dark. Ribbons of retro neon sided the walls in straight lines of geometry, lighting up the mirrored ceiling and shiny black floors. Hello, Mr. Price, the security guard said as he temporarily looked away from the TV show Lena and Roscoe. Mr. Price didn't acknowledge the cordial banter and continued to his personal elevator. He placed his eye in front of the retinal scanner, and the elevator opened. There were 2 buttons on the elevator side panel, one to his office and one to his emergency bunker, which was 10-story below the surface street. Mr. Price went up to his offices on the top floor. He looked at the mirrored ceiling and looked at himself into his eyes. I don't look that old, he thought. Of course, gravity tightens your face when you're looking up. He smiled at himself. There wasn't any use in denying it. He was completely unhappy. Vector, turn on the news and mute it. Yes, Mr. Price. A wall lit up, and a talking head was in mid-speak. Mr. Price walked to the window that overlooked Wilshire Boulevard. The streets were basically empty, with a few delivery trucks and small cars that seemed to be in a hurry. In the distance was the Sepulveda Pass. The traffic was heavy going north on the 405. The red tails lights flickered on and off like blinking Christmas lights. You have a call, Mr. Price, Vector announced. Who is it? Mr. Price turned around to face the wall screen, which was still flashing images of the high-intensity news. It's Mr. Foley. Go ahead and answer. The Vector system beeped softly. Mr. Foley appeared on the wall screen. Mr. Price, I've been trying to get a hold of you all day. You could have called me on my phone, Price said firmly. I tried, Mr. Price. Mr. Price patted his pants pockets. Shit, I left my phone at home, he whispered loudly. There's been an incident. What is it? Mr. Price asked. It's the sin meat plant, sir, Mr. Foley replied. What about it? Spit it out, Mr. Price said sternly. There seems to be a negative reaction to the product. Consumers have been calling all morning. What is the reaction? Blurred vision, scattered thoughts, and a ravenous desire for red meat. That doesn't make any sense, Mr. Price said as he sat down at his desk. Hold on, Foley. Yes, sir. Vector, mute call. Yes, Mr. Price. Implement infrared light. Yes, Mr. Price. Engaging infrared lighting. The lights turned off in Mr. Price's office. An infrared panel above his head turned on and radiated his face. Unmute call. I'm back, Mr. Foley. So, how would you like to proceed? I'll drive out to the plant in a few minutes. Is Dr. Titus there by any chance? Yes, he is. I just spoke to him an hour ago. He's going over the cloning data as we speak. That's good. How about you? Mr. Price asked. They have all the streets blocked off right now, and my power is out. So, I can't make it. I'm lucky my cell phone has good battery life. Well, keep your phone on. I will, Mr. Price. That will be all. Mr. Price had his eyes closed, and he mediated in the silence of an ended phone call. The infrared lighting seemed to bring a sense of peace to his mind. Mr. Price knew infrared therapy gave him an advantage mentally, a secret he would never share. After a few minutes of light therapy, Mr. Price stood up and walked over to a mini refrigerator that was hidden among his bookshelf. He pulled out a red glass vial and a packaged syringe. He read the white sticker on the outside of it. O+, blood type age 5, white Caucasian. He sat back down at his desk and opened the syringe package. He stabbed the blood vial and pulled back on the plunger and filled the syringe. After squeezing his hand tightly a half a dozen times, he inserted the needle between his thumb and index finger. He laid his head back in his chair and meditated on the youth of his soul. After a few minutes of blank meditation, Mr. Price opened his eyes with fervor. "Vector, turn on the lights." The lights in his office flipped on. "Vector, send me a driver. I need to head out to the Sin Meat plant immediately." "Yes, Mr. Price, right away." Mr. Price stepped into the elevator and took a fast ride down to the lobby. After exiting the elevator, he noticed the lobby security guard was gone. "What's going on?" he thought. He peered through the front entrance glass, and he saw a black town car waiting for him outside. His footsteps clinked to the marble floor, and they echoed endlessly through the building. "Mr. Price?" A voice rang out from behind. "Ah," Mr. Price said while he turned around in fright. He immediately recognized security guard Frank. "Holy shit! You scared the crap out of me. Holy fuck!" "I'm sorry, Mr. Price. I was surprised to see you." Mr. Price bent over and rested his arms on his thighs. "A little warning next time." "I'm really sorry, Mr. Price. It won't happen again." "It's okay, Frank. I've got a lot on my mind. I should have been more aware." "It's my fault, Mr. Price." "Listen, I've got to go." Mr. Price shuffled out of the entrance toward the car without looking back. Frank watched the driver run around the vehicle and open the back door for Mr. Price. "Something's not right out there," Frank mumbled to himself. Mr. Price pulled up to the Sin Meat plant, and his car was waved in by security. The employee parking lot was half full. The processing plant seemed to be in order. Mr. Price stepped out of the car and began to walk to the entrance of the plant, and he squinted his eyes tightly due to the bright, late afternoon sun. The shade of building front eased his view as he approached the front door. A buzzer clicked the lock, and Mr. Price walked in to see a looming and desperate-looking Dr. Titus. "Mr. Price, I'm glad you're here." "Walk with me," Price said in full stride. "Yes, certainly." Dr. Titus fiddled with his dark-rimmed eyeglasses. "I've gone through the data, and there doesn't seem to be any abnormalities with the cloning strands." "Something isn't right." Price reached for the door to the cloning lab. "The good thing is people aren't dying." "Well," Dr. Titus said reluctantly. "Well, what?" Price stopped walking and looked Dr. Titus in his eyes. "Come on." "The thing is, a few reports just came in," the doctor said with reluctance. "Okay, continue." "Did Foley tell you about the symptoms? The, blurred vision?" "Yes, he did. They also had mental instability and a thirst for red meat." Dr. Titus muted himself and gave Mr. Price a peculiar look. "There are reports that they are eating people." "What?" Mr. Price shouted. "The reports haven't been corroborated yet, so..." "They're eating people! Holy shit!" Mr. Price opened the door to the cloning lab and walked in. Dr. Titus followed with apprehension in his step. "So what's your best guess as to why our cloned meat products could be doing this?" "I've found no mathematical or genetic data to conclude that anything created by our lab is causing this anomaly. The only thing I can conclude hypothetically is it has something to do with the soul." "What the hell does that mean?" "It's just a guess, but maybe when animals are born in nature, there is something kind of a soul imprint in the DNA molecules, the so-called God matter, the material that molecules are made of. Our meat products are cloned, So maybe the DNA structure is identical mathematically, strand for strand in the genome makeup only. But the God matter particles are just copies, not originals. That's exactly what it is, synthetic meat, Mr. Price yelled out. You know human beings go insane if they eat human flesh. There is something about cannibalism, that the human body reacts negatively. It is unnatural, plain and simple. So what you're saying is, my product, my fortune is causing people to go insane. We literally feed millions of people around the world. I know, Dr. Titus replied. I eat it quite regularly myself and haven't felt any of the side effects in question. I don't eat it, ever, Price said. I only eat Kobe. It pays to be rich, huh, sir? I won't be rich for long if we don't fix this shit. I'm going to get something to drink. When I get back, we're going to figure this out. Do you want anything? No, I'm okay. Dr. Titus reached for the collar of his button-up shirt and loosened the squeeze of fabric. Mr. Price exited the cloning room and went right to the break room area. It was deathly quiet as he walked in. The rows of tables and chairs were empty, and a flat screen that hung on the wall next to the coffee machines and microwaves flickered images. The news was on, and Mr. Price gave it no particular attention. He was still uneasy about the fact that there wasn't a single employee to be found. Normally, upon entering the break room, Mr. Price typically received accolades with that satisfying tone of fear and humbleness that came with money and power. He was disappointed, to say the least. The coffee machine brewed 12 ounces in a cup, which was the only cup of coffee he had each day. According to studies, 1 cup a day will stave off Alzheimer's, the disease that slowly disintegrated his beloved father. His father hated coffee, so Mr. Price made it a habit to love it at least 1 cup a day at any given time. He glanced up at the news, and it went to commercial. It was a standard log line commercial for the last season of Lena and Roscoe. According to the pop press, Roscoe was going to finally have Lena's baby. Mr. Price headed back to the cloning room in heavy thought. How could the meat have such strange side effects? Maybe Titus is right. Maybe it has something to do with the soul. He sipped on the edge of the cup, and the brew warmed his throat and stomach as it went down. He kindly walked into the cloning room, and Dr. Titus was at the far end next to the genome modulator with his back toward Mr. Price. I was thinking that maybe there is something to your theory, Mr. Price said as he edged closer to Titus. I'm sure there is something. Dr. Titus jarred his head toward Mr. Price. Price's hand weakened in terror, and he dropped his coffee. The coffee splashed straight up into the air. Dr. Titus's skin had a greenish tone, and his eyes were darkened to a deep blue and were sunken deep into the sockets. Spider webs of veins bulged at his temples, and his neck arched with his head unnaturally forward. Crazy, Titus growled. Hell, Pippi, me. Titus ran his arms, lifeless and uncontrollably, over the desktop, knocking papers, pens, and computer pieces to the floor. Mr. Price shuffled his body backward toward the door in horror. His adrenaline was at full capacity, and his brain hadn't caught up with the shock. He tripped backward over a desk chair and stumbled quickly to his feet as he kept an eagle eye on Dr. Titus. Crazy, the doctor yelped out. Dr. Titus lunged at Price the moment Price opened the door to leave the cloning room. Titus groveled at the window that was inset on the door panel, and he smeared his face on the glass. Phlegm, mixed with bits of sweat and blood, created a film over the glass which blocked Price's ability to get a closer look at the newly transformed doctor. Price held the doorknob and pulled on it, trying to keep it from being opened. He could feel Titus play with the knob, but he never actually made an attempt to open the door. He can't open the door? Price said to himself. Price shut his eyes and concentrated. Of course, he's a fucking zombie. Price released the knob after a few seconds of undisturbed silence. thoughts of high anxiety began to dart through his mind. They were shooting through his brain at the speed of light. Is it the sin meat? He muttered to himself. I've got to get out of here. Mr. Price headed for the lobby, and as he turned the corner from the center corridor, he froze in his steps. A congregation of infected people were flailing at the windows of the exit door. They were mindless and seemed to have only one straightforward reason for doing so: to get the hell out of the sin meat processing plant, just like Mr. Price. Mr. Price recognized one of the infected. It was Janitor Valdez. The name patch was a dead giveaway, along with his Trace Flores slicked back 50s hairstyle. If it wasn't for the bluish-gray skin and hunched-over neck, he looked completely normal. That's where all the employees went, Price whispered. He hesitated to even misstep. It has to be like the movies. Once one zombie takes notice of a feast, yeah, I'll take notice of a feast, he thought. The rear exit. Instead of walking back slowly, Price turned around and started to run. All the zombified employees turned their twisted heads and began to walk quickly toward the new discovery of loud footsteps echoing through the hall. Price passed the cloning room, and he noticed the door was opened. He kept a strong focus on his running and where he was headed. There were several exits in the processing plant, but the easiest, fastest access was the shipping and receiving area. Mr. Price yearned to be in the sanctity of his isolated home. If I could just get home, he thought. He hit the lock release bar and threw open a set of double doors which led to the warehouse. No, he yelled. More employees were blocking the exit that led to the outside of receiving. The mass of overly gnarled bodies were hand-over-fisting each other to reach the outside. One by one, they caught a whiff of Mr. Price, and they began to turn their attention to him. Price felt his adrenaline burst. He looked around for a resolution. He backed himself against the wall, unable to collect his thoughts. What is happening? He cried out in desperation. A sudden rush of heat warmed his face and lit up the area in front of him. Mr. Price, a shadowy figure said. Foley? Price chimed out. He instantly recognized Foley's silhouette. What are you doing here? I'm here to save you, he shouted while he held up a lighter to an aerosol can. He lit the lighter and sprayed a flame at the transformed employees. Follow me, sir. Foley gave another quick spray of flame at the assailants, and they cowered down, flailing their arms. Foley led the way out of the shipping and receiving exit. Plumes of smoke smeared the skyline in every direction. What's with the smoke? Price asked. You're not going to believe this, sir. Believe what? Hurry this way, Foley said firmly. They ran around the corner of the processing plant into the back alley that paralleled 5th Street. Foley's car was parked next to a blue recycling dumpster, and they both hurried over to it and hopped inside the car. Foley was out of breath. Beads of sweat gathered above his eyebrows and began to drip down the sides of his reddened face. Mr. Price was equally exasperated and tilted sideways in the back seat. What is happening? Price asked. Zombie apocalypse, Foley replied. What? That's right, sir. Did the sin meat cause all of this? Price blurted out in dismay. Foley began to cough deeply and wildly. Phlegm was being loosened at every gorging force of air. He was unable to catch his breath. There was a moment of dead silence. Foley, are you okay? Price asked. A tense, jarring pang of nervousness emerged in his stomach. Foley? Mr. Price tapped Foley's shoulder in quick rapidity. Yeah, I'm fine. Foley cleared his throat with a final thrust of air. People are turning into zombies all over the city, all over the world. Foley coughed into his hand. A speck of bright blood shone on his palm. Can you get me home? Mr. Price asked. Foley started the car and sped off out of the back alley. A throng of zombie processing plant employees bursted out through the shipping and receiving door. They stared aimlessly at their newfound freedom and scattered in different directions down the alleyway. The streets were empty of life. A few recently abandoned cars were pulled to the side of the street with blinkers on, and doors left wide open. Prize got a ghastly glimpse of a pair of human legs ripped from their torso, bloodied and pulverized to the bone. "Can you speed it up?" Prize made a request as they drove past the torso that belonged to the legs. Prize was in utter disbelief at the horror he was seeing. He couldn't tell if the head was missing or if it was just smashed and smeared to an oblivion. Foley didn't speak as he drove, which was usual when he drove Mr. Prize anywhere. It was beneath Mr. Prize to engage in small talk, especially with people who weren't as smart as he was or as wealthy. Prize's house was a few blocks away when suddenly Foley tilted forward and slammed his head against the steering wheel. At the same time, his feet stepped on the gas, and the car barreled down the street and began to veer to the right. "Foley!" Prize yelled out in a panic. Mr. Prize lunged for the steering wheel, but it was too late. The car edged off the road and plowed into a fire hydrant, propelling Mr. Prize's body through the windshield and onto the sidewalk. He rolled up to a steel-grated fence and halted in excruciating pain. He couldn't breathe, and he rolled over onto his stomach. Blood was dripping from his forehead, and he touched the blood with his hands. "What the?" he stammered. The car engine was steaming as the water from the broken hydrant sprayed into the air. The hydrant sprayed a cold mist that lightly touched Prize's face, and it felt like a baptismal. A strange, peculiar sound of cracking glass came from the direction of the car. Prize shifted his head in pain and looked toward the car. A pair of legs were shuffling through broken glass, and the view of a transformed Foley was grotesque. Foley limped towards Prize with his femur protruding through his torn dress slacks. Blood and bruised facial muscles covered Foley's bluish, gaunt face. He moaned in agony, yet still moved forward. The deep blue hue of his eyes were focused on Prize in a desirous fashion. Foley looked like he was fighting the sudden change to his brain function. "Foley, it's me, John Prize." Foley stopped instantly and focused his attention to a squawking bird that lowly flew by, swooping down, then back up to the smoke-filled sky. Foley growled wildly at the bird and raised his hand in an attempt to grab it. Prize muscled his way to his feet, keeping a keen eye on Foley. He felt no broken bones, just a little stiff in the joints. The top of his head throbbed, but it was manageable. He looked down the street, and he could see the roof of his house in the close distance. He walked quickly, holding his ribs. "A broken rib, maybe two," he whispered. "I can't do this." He looked back down the street, and he could see Foley shuffling along. As he watched, Foley's broken leg snapped completely, and he fell to the asphalt. He didn't lose his attention on Prize and started to drag his body over the asphalt like a wounded soldier in battle. "Poor guy. I'm glad it's not me," Prize muttered. He walked up to his security gate and typed a code on the electric lock. The gate opened and Prize walked in. His house was quiet and clean. The generator had already kicked in, so he had full power. "Vector, are you there?" "Yes, Mr. Prize. How are you today?" The semi-robotic tone of the Vector system brought peace and a sense of security to Mr. Prize's heart. "Just a minute," he spoke out. "Yes, Mr. Prize." Prize went to the bathroom and grabbed his first aid kit. He immediately set it down by the sink. "I'm going to take a shower instead," he said to himself quietly. He was out of the shower in minutes, and he dried off his body while looking at himself in the mirror. He thought about the series of events that had just occurred. Was it even real? He thought. He felt his head, and it was sore with a bloodied lump. He shook off the discomfort and got dressed, and he felt good about his personal situation. Vector turned on the news. The flat-screen wall turned on, and the news displayed brightly. Raise the volume. Yes, Mr. Prize, Vector said. The volume arose, and the female news reporter was ranting about the current events. This is outrageous, she said. Sin meat has revolutionized our food supply, not to mention the climate change benefits. The newswoman was obviously in a discontented mood. It was written all over her face with a Botox-laden scowl and tight lips. We have some breaking news, she quickly blurted out, interrupting herself. Dr. Ken, the author of the book Meat is Murder, is with us now. How are you today, Doctor? Nice to be here today, Dr. Ken replied. So, tell us what's happening out there. Why are people turning into zombies? Dr. Ken cleared his throat and adjusted his black-rimmed glasses. It's too early for an exact cause, but I do have a reasonable hypothesis based on my extensive research in the field of nutrition. Tell us, doctor, what is it? What is happening? Don't eat the meat, Dr. Ken blurted out. The countenance on his was serious, straight. Okay, the news anchor replied. Her sarcastic tone was a signal for dissatisfaction with the answer. Are you talking about the sin meat? Yes, I am. How could sin meat products possibly cause people to turn into zombies? This is the problem. Our scientific data does not reveal any indicators that sin meat is harmful to the human body or brain. The science tells us this is a perfect substitute for animal-based meat products. Dr. Ken shook his head in frustration. I eat sin meat every day, the news anchor replied. What does this mean for people like me as a consumer? Not sure. I don't have any data on the long-term or short-term effects. All we know is that it starts with the meat. Dr. Ken coughed deeply. He stopped for a moment and began coughing again. Sorry about that. He grabbed a glass of water that sat on the small table next to him. He began to twitch and shake, and as the glass reached his lips, the water splashed over the rim. He jerked violently forward, knocking his eyeglasses off his face. Doctor, are you okay? The news report switched frame and showed the concerned face of the news anchor woman. Dr. Ken? The news feed frame changed back to the doctor, who was face down. He darted up in a rapid-fire motion and looked into the camera lens. His face was blue-gray, and his eyes had become gaunt and bluish at the cornea. Meat, he groveled. As he lunged at the camera, it swung out of frame, which gave the viewer a skewed angle of a cameraman running away from Dr. Ken. The news feed cut to commercial. Turn off the news, Prize said. The wall flat screen turned off. Mr. Prize suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion rise through his body. It started in his toes and arose through his legs and chest. Once it hit his brain, the drowsiness was uncontrollable. Vector, wake me in 1 hour. Yes, Mr. Prize. Mr. Prize laid on his couch and sunk into the cushions. The couch was placed perfectly in the room to get that lustrous Los Angeles skyline optic. He drifted asleep with the horizon of small skyscrapers fading to black. The city around Mr. Prize had become ravaged by the quick-spreading disease created by the consumption of the sin meat products. A woman named Colleen, who happened to be the CEO of the Beverly East and West Clothing Company, lived next door to Mr. Prize, and she was talking with her 7-year-old son. Mom, I'm scared. What do we do? Colleen was deeply frightened about the apocalyptic scenario that was playing out in the city. She knelt down and gave her son Sam a kiss on his forehead. I'm not sure what to do. I think if we wait, I'm sure the government will come and help, she said with a smile of pure hopelessness. I know, Mom, but on the news they said that sin meat that we've been eating is causing it. Sam was wide-eyed, and he felt unnerved and unsettled in his childish gut. Maybe we'll be the exception. Colleen paused and saw rising plumes of smoke vape into the sky. Listen, Sam, and listen to me good. If something happens to me, you run next door to John Prize's house. He's one of the richest people in the county, and I'm sure people will come to find him. You got it?" "Yes, Mom," Sam said as he hugged his mom tightly. Colleen began to cough, and she went to the kitchen sink and knelt over it, bracing herself with her arms. "Mom, are you okay?" Sam asked. Sam backed away from his mom. The simple fact that she didn't answer meant something was gravely wrong. Colleen coughed a few more times as she stared into the stainless steel kitchen sink bottom. Her eyes became hazy, and she could feel a dull pressure in the back of her neck, and it popped her neck forward. In an instant, she had forgotten who she was, and her vision had become the color blue. Her sight was a blue filter with a kaleidoscope of shiny diamonds that moved in a circular formation. She felt a thirst well up in her salivary glands. She looked at the kitchen faucet and couldn't understand why she was looking at it. The flesh under skin buzzed with a small vibration, and she felt an intense hunger rise in the back of her mind. Sam stared at his mom in horror. She had completely transformed, and she looked to his direction. She saw a glowing silhouette moving slowly away from her. "Mom, stop it," Sam pleaded. Colleen did not hear Sam's words. She was attracted to the glow of his soul, and there was nothing that could stop her. She kept moving forward toward Sam with an intense desire to have him in her body. The hunger for meat craved through her essence. Sam begged and pleaded for his mom to stop, but she couldn't. Prize was in REM sleep, and he dreamt of the past. He was talking to Foley in his office just before the company went public. "Don't you think we should do more research on the new cloning meat products?" "Who cares? People want it, and we are going to get rich. I know for damn sure I'm not going to eat it." "I don't know," Foley said. "Cloning the meat seems so much different than just using plant-based byproducts." "It is different, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper. Now quit being so gloomy. Dr. Titus has performed multiple tests, and the DNA signatures are perfect. So stop it with the negativity. This is the world I created, and I will not fail." Mr. Prize awoke to the alert of the vector system. He picked his head up and peered out of the window that overlooked Los Angeles. He sat up quickly at the sight of the smoke plumes across the city skyline that had grown to an innumerable amount. "Looks like things have gotten worse," he said to himself. He stood up and walked over to the window and took a wandering gaze at the city and his neighborhood. "Vector, turn on the news." "I apologize, Mr. Prize, but there aren't any signals to broadcast." As Prize observed the city in the solitude of his mansion, he couldn't help to think that he was all alone. He saw movement down below at the entrance of his security gate. He changed his position to get a better look at what it was. "Oh shit," he said with a smile. "It's Foley. Looks like he made it." Foley's hand was reaching in through the mail slot on the gate door. His hand was bloodied and slightly skinned around the wrist and forearm. "Poor old Foley," Prize said solemnly. He came to the sudden realization that his right-hand man at Sin Meat all these years was never coming back. He was going to die a zombie. "My cell phone," he said. Prize ran out of the living room and through the kitchen. He passed a walk-through that was an interior tunnel that was covered in glass paneling. He saw the city and his neighborhood once again, and it looked dismal and obliterated. He saw his phone on the side table next to bed. For the first time, his room felt cold and lifeless. The place that was once his refuge suddenly felt like a prison. He pressed his phone on, and there were hundreds of notifications. He scrolled through the messages, looking for his mother's number. Here it is. The message read, "Call me." That was 10 hours ago. A sickening feeling riled up in Prize's stomach, and it wrenched like a sickening knife blade twirling without care. He saw a voice message, and he pressed to listen. "Honey, it's me. People all around me are turning into zombies. I'm scared. I heard it was your meat product, and you know me. I eat it every day." She began coughing and continued, "I feel bad. What do I do?" She coughed again loudly, and Prize could hear the phone hit what he presumed to be the floor. Then there was silence. Prize looked at the message time signature on his cell phone, and it was still playing. He placed it back to his ear, and he was horrified by the gurgling growls of his mother's familiar voice slobbering over the phone. The call ended. Tears welled up in Mr. Prize's eyes. The reality that the zombie effects of the sin meat was spreading sobered his thoughts. He cried out in anguish with the fact that his personal situation had taken a turn for the worst, for he was now utterly alone, and it was fashioned by the will of his own hands.